This is a video about depersonalization disorder. This is actually really hard to make because I feel like DPD is one of those things that resists being talked about even more intensely than regular depression and anxiety. But externalizing it is really helpful, and on days like today where it just suddenly pops up really intensely for no reason, well, there's a reason, but there's a lot of deep reasons, but I want to try to explain what it feels like, and because it almost defies description because it's so inherently subjective, but if I can try at least, maybe I'll be successful. So it is connected to anxiety. It is an extension of anxiety, but it's an anxiety that comes up as a result of deep, deep existential threat to your mind. For example, it's really common in rape victims. When facing the true pain and trauma all at once would probably drive someone insane or suicidal. It's also really common in child abuse situations and neglect, which is where mine sort of came from, at least the framework for it. So, since it is just an extension of anxiety, even if my anxiety is up for something completely unrelated, my DPDR symptoms will go up as well, because my mind views whatever's going on as an existential threat, whether that's social anxiety or caffeine, even whatever it is. So I've had DPD for 2 years. It started for me with a bad trip on marijuana. And for a while, for a significant amount of time, I thought that I had broken my brain because of the marijuana, and that I had some weird, rare reaction, because I'd never heard of anyone else having that sort of reaction to marijuana. So I thought I had some just rare reaction that had caused me to lose my mind, honestly. And then I realized through seeing other people's videos, talking, therapy, that the weed just blew the lid off of everything that was already there and buried. So there's nothing inherently bad about weed other than the fact that it makes you face things that you have buried for good reason, probably. And I hope to smoke weed again someday, be able to, but that's way down the line. It's not even a thought in my mind right now. Um, so after that experience, I felt the best way I can describe it is fragmented. Like there was a part of me logically that was still there, my higher reasoning and logic and the ego, I guess you could call it. But something lower and much deeper that had been present more or less before. I mean, I think I had had episodes of this before the weed that I just ascribed to anxiety. Um, but it wasn't until after the weed that it was relatively constant all the time. Um, so it felt like that lower part, the id, if you will, or the reptilian brain, or whatever you want to call it. Um, for me, I like to think of it as the scared little kid, me, that to an extent we all have inside of us, that just animalistic part of ourselves that is so self preservatory preservation. It wants to preserve itself. Um, it is, when I say animalistic, I mean it is an evolutionary drive to preserve your life. Um, so that part of me after that felt like it was hiding. And just that switch in perception from um, having more or less everything together, facing the world all the time, to having half of me facing the world all the time without that deep emotional connection. Is what the lower brain provides. Um, it freaked me the fuck out. And I called my therapist and I talked to my therapist and I was like, I think I've broken myself somehow. I think I've permanently changed something. And what should I do? Should I go to the hospital? Should I commit myself? Should I just sleep it off? Is this permanent? She was like, well, wait a week. See if it's not just something from the weed that's going to pass. And it didn't pass. I mean, it got better than the horrible levels of anxiety that it was the first few days. But I started to notice that it was just there. Now, later on, I figured out that that was because the lid is off. Once the lid's off, you can't really put it back on. You can try to numb yourself with drugs or alcohol or casual sex or whatever hedonistic thing you want. But once it's off, it's off. And for some people, the lid is on for good reason. Because if they faced everything all at once and it all came out all at once, their mind would break. You know, like I said, for me, um, I just dissociated part of me. And so that's what's been my situation for the past 2 years. Um, so as far as what it feels like, um, So, I mean, I saw a good illustration of it almost on the internet. So normally your brain is kind of facing outwards. You're seeing the world, you know, you're interacting with the world, all of you. People take that for granted that they're just, all of them is interacting with the world. Um, but for people with severe anxiety or DPD, um, it's like your gaze is inward all the time. So it's like I view everything when it's bad. I view things as if I'm watching a movie of myself doing them. That I don't have the agency to be doing because there's something, whatever provides that agency is not present. It's in the back of my mind somewhere, scared, crying. Um, so it's like whatever I'm doing isn't me doing it. There's no way that I could be doing it. So it's like watching myself do it, even though I'm doing it. Um, and it's such an indescribable feeling. It's such a strange feeling. Um, and I had to get to the point where I accepted it, or I would just ruminate on that feeling of disconnection constantly, which made it worse. Be like, I would catastrophize and say, wow, I'm never going to feel better. My brain is broken. I've done something. And I had to learn to accept that it is just a natural defense mechanism. That when you go 20 years of your life burying shit, and then one day 20 years of shit comes out all at once, you are gonna dissociate from it. You are going to not be able to handle it all at once. Um, there's a good reason for that. Now, trying to function while having it is weird because, you can go through the day. I can go through the day, you know, I'm in grad school, so I can go through the day, teach my class, uh, do homework, all things that require upper prefrontal cortex things, logic, reasoning. Um, and then at the end of the day, not be able to look back with emotional memory. You might be saying, well, what's emotional memory? But like, emotional memory is you being able to look back on a memory and remember what you felt like. Now I have memory. I can say, well, earlier today I had to get up really early for this online class seminar I had. I remember doing that. It's a story in my mind. But, sometimes I can look back and not remember. I can remember almost like it's in black and white. It's flat. It's just an acknowledgement of something that happened. It's not like this colorful, vivid, this is how I felt then. Um, which happens to everyone at some point. If you're high or drunk. But I don't smoke and I don't drink. So, and it's all the time without my consent. So, um, Yeah. So that's a basic explanation. There's a lot of rumination. Um, I'm a very analytical person, and apparently this is really common with sensitive, analytical people. Um, I can take one train of thought and ruminate on it for hours. The implications or the possible outcomes. That's why it was so horrible for me when it first started, because I would ruminate on the fact that I felt disconnected, that I felt half of me was experiencing shit. The next step for me was, well, I've gone insane. Um, and from I've gone insane, it went to, well, I can't trust anything I think or see anymore if I'm insane. Uh, so it was like, if A is true, then B must also be true. And you start to live your life thinking that self imposed, that, all these things are true, when in reality, that's just one interpretation of your experience. So, part of therapy has been learning to interpret my subjective experience through exploring the things that led to it, which for me was growing up, I dissociated from traumatic situations. I dissociated from situations where I felt an existential threat, which when you're little is things that adults wouldn't consider to be existential threats, but when you're little, you don't know. And as I got older with my sexuality, um, that became an existential threat in my social group, my family, and the groups that they associated with. It became an existential threat. And it always affected me when I would see shit like conversion therapy, where kids come out to their parents and as a response they get sent to pray away the gay places or get completely rejected and become suicidal. Um, it's you're stuck, when you I realized or acknowledged, I guess, I was gay when I was 12, maybe a little earlier. Um, when you're 12, you don't have anywhere to go. I mean, I got kicked out once, and I went to stay with my grandma for a little while. But other than that, you don't have anywhere to go, legally, unless super bad things are happening, and then social services comes in. But everything that was happening to me was legal. I mean, uh, God bless America, right? But so I viewed that part of my identity as an existential threat. So I cut it off and separated from it and fragmented it myself. Everything that I've experienced has been my own doing, and it was for good reason. I didn't want to endanger myself. Um, and I don't necessarily mean physically endanger myself, but be so vulnerable for my identity. It's like when you put your identity on the line to the people who are supposed to love and validate you the most, and you know that they won't. It's like if you did that and put your identity on the line, and it did happen, when you're that young, even a preteen, and your entire identity is invalidated, what do you have left? You know, what do you have left? Um, and I think that's why we see everyone acts all surprised when, you know, teenagers, preteens commit suicide. But you're stuck. Like, before you turn 16, you're legally stuck. You don't have anywhere to go. And that's what suicide is the result of. Feeling stuck, like there's no hope. That nothing's going to change and your suffering isn't going to stop. That's what leads to suicide. So yeah, I chose to fragment myself, cut off parts of myself, and not just my sexuality, but the part of me that was proud of anything I did. For example, I didn't want to play. I played piano. I didn't want to play piano for anyone. I wanted to essentially disappear. Um, and I didn't want to be seen. And that's all the stuff that was, you know, the lid was ripped off and all of it came up. Which, in the grand scheme of things, is a good thing. In the short term, while I'm knitting myself back together, um, well, it's actually more accurate to say forging an identity for the first time, because I've never had one. Um, and that's something people do over the span of their entire childhood that I'm having to do. It's been 2 years now. That I'm having to do in that time span. Um, so having to, it's so crazy to talk about, like having to bring together these two parts of your mind that have been separated or, you know, literally dissociated for so long. You know, the logical part of my brain that is a part of who I am and that is always present in doing things. Um, but then the just base emotional part as well that for so long, I just denied that I even had strong emotions. I saw emotions as not weakness, but more irrelevant. Um, what was important was logic and reason, and you were stupid if you didn't see that. But now I can see that, you know, reason and emotion are just, you can't separate them. And if you do separate them, then you are a fragmented person. And just, that's what I don't want to be anymore. So the work, I guess, of putting those pieces back together. It's super hard. It's the hardest thing I've ever had to do my entire life. And it's discouraging sometimes, when with mental health, any therapist can tell you it's always, two steps forward, one step back process. And there are highs and lows. And the unique thing about DPD is that you you can convince yourself that it's all worthless, that it's all meaningless, and that you don't even exist. So what's the point of working on anything? And it's not like all of you thinks you don't exist. It's like half of you thinks you don't exist. And then the logical part of your brain comes in and is like, well, I do exist, but subjective trumps objective every time. You know, if if the part of your brain that is responsible for self-preservation is saying all this sucks and you don't exist because it's a defense mechanism that has become maladaptive, and your logical brain steps in and is like, oh, well, you obviously exist, so uh, it's you can't talk yourself out of that subjective experience. You can't reason with it. Um, Otherwise, I wouldn't have DPD. So, um, so that's discouraging when you, as much as you try to reason your way out of things, which is what I've done my whole life, you can't. It's it's useless. Resistance is futile, as they would say. Um, so